Today we are going to learn how to make pumpkin sticky buns. This is a great recipe as it shows you how to take one recipe, the pumpkin cinnamon rolls, make a few minor adjustments, and then have a completely different recipe. The first thing we need is 1/2 cup of milk, 120 milliliters, and you want to heat it up to a lukewarm. That's about 110 degrees Fahrenheit or 43 degrees Celsius. Don't get it too warm or you will kill off the yeast. If it's too hot to the touch, it's too hot for the yeast. You're going to need 1 teaspoon of yeast, that's 3.5 grams. I'm going to pour the yeast into the milk and let it dissolve. I'm going to set this aside and then we're going to work on the rest of our dough. In a large bowl, we have 2 1/4 cups of flour, that's 337.5 grams. I'm using plain flour here, all-purpose flour. I don't like to use bread flour when it comes to sweet doughs or soft doughs like dinner rolls. You want a really nice, soft, tender dough here. Next, we're going to add in our spices and salt. We're going to use 1/2 teaspoon of salt, that's 2.5 grams, 1/2 teaspoon of cinnamon, 1 gram, 1/2 teaspoon of ginger, that's 1 gram, and 1/2 teaspoon of allspice, that's 1 gram. Now, the reason why I use spices in the dough is because pumpkin itself doesn't have a strong flavor other than just sweetness. If you've ever ate pumpkin straight out of the can, there really isn't a strong flavor. And even if you go to the trouble of making a pumpkin puree, it's not a really strong flavor. It's just sweet, which is fine. And also it helps you be able to cut back on that sugar for the rest of your recipe, but it doesn't give a lot of flavor to the dough itself. That's why I like to add the spices. Then you want to add in sugar. I'm using just 2 tablespoons or 25 grams. You can use brown sugar if you like, that's perfectly fine, or even honey. Once it's nicely combined like this, we're going to add in some oil for some softness again. 1 tablespoon or 15 milliliters. You can use any type of oil you like. You could even use melted butter. I have personally found that olive oil is my favorite to use just because it has some added health benefits. Then we're going to add in 1 egg or 50 grams. And then we're going to add in that pumpkin. You can use canned pumpkin or you can puree your own pumpkin. I'll leave that up to you. We're going to use 1/2 cup or 120 grams. Finally, we're going to put in our milk mixture and I'm just going to check it to make sure it's not too hot because I don't want to scramble that egg that's inside of my dough. If it was a little bit too warm, I would just let it sit a bit longer to make sure that that egg wouldn't cook. And we're going to mix this together until it's a very sticky dough. Now, if you're having trouble working with it in the beginning, just cover it and let it sit 5 to 10 minutes and it will absorb some more of that flour and make it easier for you to work with. If you've never worked with sticky dough before, I will give you a link below that will show you how to work with sticky dough in more detail. But in the meantime, let's just get started. We're going to move this onto a work surface and begin to use a technique called the slap and fold. It's where you literally slap the dough down and fold it over, because if you try to do this the traditional way, you're going to have it just stick to your hands and stick to your counter all over the place. Now, this is a sticky dough, so you got it. It's going to stick. It's going to get all over you. Please make sure, just keep working with it and bear with me because this is a wonderful dough to work with. Within 5 minutes, it should stop sticking to you as much. And it should start to stretch, but if you pull on it too much, it'll tear easily. And if you notice the texture of the dough looks kind of shaggy still, that's another tip that it's not quite ready. So just keep working with it until it gets less tacky looking and you really start seeing that you can push on it. But of course, if you do really try, you can still tear it. What you're looking for is a slightly tacky dough that doesn't stick to you too much and doesn't stick to the counter too much. But it is still going to stick to your fingers a bit if you slow down. Once you get to that stage, you're going to cover it and let it rest until it's double in size. Now this depends how long it takes on the temperature of your room and your environment. It could be as little as 30 minutes, but it's going to be on average 90 minutes, 60 to 90 minutes. Mine took about 90 minutes. So be prepared to just watch it until it's double in size. The next thing we want to do is butter our pan generously. We're going to use part of the butter that we're using for the topping, and we're going to just butter it completely all the way around, including the sides. Now you can use a pastry brush if you want, but I found if you use your fingertips, you use a lot less butter. I'm using maybe about a half a teaspoon's worth of butter here. Whereas when I've used a pastry brush, it's taken as much as 2 tablespoons for the exact same pan. That is a 9 by 13 or a 23 by 33 centimeter pan. Now we're going to get our topping ready. We have some melted butter. It's 2 tablespoons or 28 grams. And we're going to pour it in with 1/4 cup or 84 grams of honey, 1/4 cup or 56 grams of brown sugar, and we're going to stir it until it's a slurry like this. You're going to spread this out evenly on your buttered pan until you get a nice thin layer. This will take you a few moments, but take your time here because you want every single roll to have this nice sticky bun flavor to it. After you get a nice thin coating, we're going to add on some chopped pecans. We're going to use a half a cup of finely chopped pecans or 56 grams. Now, if you don't like pecans, you could substitute it for any kind of nut that you like. I've personally found that walnuts go really well with pumpkin. For the filling, we're going to use some brown sugar, cinnamon, and flour. You're going to use brown sugar, 1/4 cup or 56 grams, 2 teaspoons of cinnamon, 4 grams, and 1 teaspoon of flour or 3 grams. The flour is in there to help the cinnamon and sugar mixture adhere to the dough and not all just spread out after it bakes. If you've ever had a cinnamon roll where just everything falls out and you don't taste any cinnamon except for on the very bottom and it's all just in the pan, that's why you don't have any flour in your mixture. Add a little bit of flour and it makes a big difference. As you can see, our dough has doubled in size, and now we are just going to make a 9 by 12 rectangle or a 23 by 30 centimeter rectangle. And you don't have to use a rolling pin, but it helps everything get a little bit more even. Now I like to just sprinkle just a tiny bit of flour, about a half teaspoon's worth, onto the work surface and then a little bit on top of the dough, and then just gently start rolling this out. Every so often pick up your dough and turn it, and that just keeps it from sticking to the counter. And if it's sticking too much, you can add a little bit more flour. And you can use a ruler along the way. If you don't have a ruler, a good rule of thumb, if you don't have a ruler, is you can use the pan that you're going to be baking it in. It's 9 by 13, and then you can just make it that size and then just cut it 12 equals portions. Now just pick up your dough and let it bounce back and make sure it's not sticking to the counter. It will save you a lot of heartache if you do this step, because sometimes if it sticks to the counter and you go to roll it up, you could ruin the whole process. So take the time to pick up that dough. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to spread 2 tablespoons of softened butter or margarine, 28 grams, all over the dough evenly. And after you get that on there, you're going to put your sugar mixture on top and just sprinkle it evenly as well. Try to leave a little bit at the longest side completely uncovered, and that just helps the dough stick when you roll it up at the end. Once you got that rolled on, you're going to put another half a cup of finely chopped pecans all over the dough evenly. And then before you roll it up, just press it down slightly, and that helps it from falling all out when you start to roll it up. You may need to go wipe off your hands in between the step of rolling it up. That's okay. Now, starting at the 12-inch side or the 30 centimeter, you're going to roll up gently but firmly until you get a nice shaped log. Take your time as you go here, because if you rush it, you can stretch out the dough or knock your filling out along the sides. Okay, once you have this about the size that you need, you're just going to cut it into 12 equal portions. If it's a little bit bigger, you could cut off the ends and throw that dough away, but why would you waste any of this beautifully tasting dough? I like to go ahead and just use the wonky ends and accept that those 2 pieces are not going to look as pretty as the rest. Now you can use a serrated knife to cut this, or you can use some dental floss. I found the dental floss is the easiest method. So how you do this is you put the dough on top of the dental floss, and then you crisscross it and pull sharply and fast. And that will give you a really nice swirl without it compacting. Repeat this step for the next 11 pieces. If you've watched my other videos on how to make cinnamon rolls or pumpkin cinnamon rolls, this is a very similar process. The only difference is you're putting some nuts in the center, and then you're putting some nuts on the bottom, and you're creating this nice glaze for the top. Now you're going to put on some saran wrap, and oh my goodness, you guys, did you see how beautifully I've done that? I never do that with saran wrap. We should all have a party and celebrate. I usually manhandle it. Let this sit for 60 to 90 minutes or until double in size. Again, it might take less or more time. You want to preheat that oven while these are rising to 350 degrees Fahrenheit or 180 degrees Celsius. And then you're going to bake them until they're golden brown. 20 to 30 minutes or until they reach 190 degrees Fahrenheit or 88 degrees Celsius in the center. If you don't have a thermometer, you're just looking for them to be golden brown on top. Now, while these are warm, you're going to have to turn these out. You want to do that because you just made basically a caramel glaze on top. If you wait and let this sit and cool, it's going to stick to the pan, guaranteed. If you do not pay attention to me and it does stick, don't panic. Just heat back up your oven, put those in for another 5 minutes on a really low temperature, and it will heat up that caramel and release them from the pan. So not all is lost, but you want to carefully and immediately flip these over while wearing oven mitts, and they will turn out beautifully if you did everything just the way I showed you. Some of the topping may stick to the pan. If you remove it while it's still warm, it slides out really easily. If it's cold, you're going to have to soak it in some water. Let's open one of these up and look at what it looks like. This is just so delicious. It's a caramelized pecan cinnamon roll, basically. This sticky bun is so delicious with the caramelized pecans and the pumpkin hint and the spices. It's just wonderful to eat. I hope you enjoyed this recipe. Here are your ingredients if you want to follow along. I know it's a long list, don't worry, I included a link below as well to give you the full recipe. Thank you for visiting us at jacksonsjob.com, and as always, happy baking.